My name is Hope. Welcome to the presentation. I'm going to base this discussion on the effects of Western education on the current education system in Africa. But before I go into further discussion, I would love to take you back to the brief history of Western education. Western education was brought by the missionaries. Missionaries came into Africa to bring education to the Africans because they thought that the Africans had no knowledge, and they thought that the Africans were living in evil culture. So the missionaries came into Africa through the colonial government to come and persuade the Africans to abandon their culture. When missionaries came into Africa, they began with building the schools more than they built the stations. They built stations in different countries in Africa. But then, the colonial government had no interest in the education of Africans. So then, the missionaries had to persuade the colonial government that they provide education to the Africa who seemed to be living in evil. So they wanted to bring enlightenment to the Africans, to make them become civilized. When missionaries came into Africa, they thought that Africans had no knowledge on their own, and they thought that they were living in dark, and they wanted to enlighten them. The missionaries came with the view of bringing civilization to Africans, because of the way the Africans lived, missionaries believed that they were living in barbaric ways. So missionaries came in and came through the colonial government. They persuaded the colonial government to give them a go-ahead to provide education in Africa. But then, the colonial government had less interest in the education of the Africans. The view of the missionaries was to convert Africa to Christianity. But then they thought of one thing, to say the only way Africa can get education was through schooling. So they built more schools than they built stations in Africa. The only way which missionaries thought an Africa can come out of the darkness, which they thought they were, was to bring education to them and make them to know how to read so that they can understand the Bible. They can understand who God was, and they can change their way of living. But we have to note that when these missionaries came into Africa, Africans had their own knowledge. They had their own culture. They had their own experiences. They had their own set of beliefs which they believed in. And Africans had lived as one. They had one common God. But missionaries, when they came in, they managed to persuade Africans to abandon their culture, to abandon their experiences, to abandon their knowledge, and to abandon all their system of beliefs. I will now draw your attention to the effects of Western education on current education system in Africa. The use of English language as a principal language of instruction up to date is still problematic. You know, if Africa was to use their own language to give instruction to learners, learners would do well in accumulation of their knowledge and skills. You believe to say there are some certain skills and knowledge which needs our language, which needs our learners to be taught in our language for them to understand. Because if we use local language in teaching and learning, the learners are going to accumulate knowledge which they are going to use efficiently and effectively. But this is not just limited to education. Even in our culture, you find that most of Africans, they have abandoned their mother tongues. Instead, they want to use English. Because everyone feels that when you use English, you look like you are civilized. But then, even in most developed countries, they have not abandoned their languages. They still use their language as the official language of instructions. The Western education curriculum did not have the African values and experiences. So you find that this has conditioned the learners and teachers to see no value in their culture. And then learners and teachers, they feel inferior to learn about their culture. This has created a crisis of identity because Africans are failing to identify themselves because of mixture of knowledge. They cannot identify themselves in the knowledge that they learn from education because some of the content is purely Western. The imposition of Western education curriculum alienated Africans from their own education, and this only protected the interests of the designers. Some of the content which were taught in Western education curriculum were purely Western. And you can agree with me that even in some subjects which are being taught today in our education system, they are still Western. You know, there are some knowledge and content which do not fit our society, which do not fit our communities. They are purely Western. In some subjects, if you analyze well, you find that at least in most of the subjects, you find some contents are purely Western, which just serves the interests of the Westerners. They do not fit our society. They do not help our communities. Education which was provided in Africa just supported the culture of the Westerners, their education and their religion. But African countries adopted this kind of an education curriculum at their expense of their culture, religion, and education. The education curriculum which is provided, which is purely Western, you find that its main objective is just making the recipients to hope for white-collar jobs than learners being entrepreneurs in their own community. So you find that there's a big gap between the practical and the theory part. The kind of education which is provided today in Africa, it's just looking at who scores the highest, who is the highest in examinations. But this does not give a good reflection of who a best performer is. There is a lot of gap between what pupils learn in school and what they face in the society or out there in the community after they finish school. You can agree with me that a lot of learners have produced good results from our education system, but then they fail to perform in their communities. They fail to cope with the local and global problems that occurs in our society. So this all creates some sort of crisis identity in Africa, because we are not producing the learners who can work efficiently in the society or in the community outside there, but producing people who are able to recite, people who are able to memorize the knowledge which they acquired from the education system. Many African countries have put it into consideration to transform their education curriculum, but still there are some gaps. Still, there is more needed to be done. You know, any concerned part which wants to reflect on the curriculum, they should really get concerned of including their values, the culture, the experiences, and the knowledge of Africans. To transform the curriculum, it should be done in the sense that the context of African traditional education is included. This should include the emotions and the spiritual empowerment of the learners, of which people should come to know themselves in their environment and how they should act within their environment. The aim of reconstructing the education curriculum should be to give indigenous people the same right of place which has been given by other sources of knowledge. They should be given an equal opportunity to display their knowledge in their education curriculum. Africans should be given a right of place to include their knowledge in their education curriculum, because this will help learners to sort out their issues, global or community problems in their societies. It is understood that education calls for global village, which calls for other global knowledge. But then, this should not be at the expense of Africa abandoning their own knowledge and culture and adopting Western education. Western education, the proponents of global knowledge, they view Africa that it does not have knowledge which can coexist with their knowledge. In fact, Western education cannot even accept African traditional knowledge because they think it is barbaric. But then why should Africa accept Western education at their expense? This presentation is not really saying that the African education curriculum should abandon the Western education curriculum. No. The essence is that the Africans should try to put in place their traditional knowledge, their culture, and their experiences, and accept Western education, which they feel is most important to their society, so as to maintain the global village. You can agree with me that if education system in Africa was to be based on the education which is affiliated by Africans, Africans will be able to deal with global and community problems efficiently and effectively, because they are part of the education, because they are learning what is in their community. In other words, the curriculum in higher education should be really anchored on the cultural and intellectual environment of the community, where the locality is. Curriculum planners should therefore contribute to the project of readdressing and infusing the content of education curriculum with the wealth of the knowledge of the Africans, which is appropriate and centered on human development in our society. The learners should therefore see the connection between what they learn in school and what they face in the society. They should see the content should give them a reflection in the community. The proposed education curriculum should allow learners to see connection between the content and what they experience in their real life situation. What it means here is that there should be a provision within education curriculum that the content which the learners are learning in school, there is a direct link to what they are going to face in their society, in their community. By doing this, we find that we are going to produce learners who are quite productive in their community and who will help to sort out issues in the community very efficiently and effectively. Lastly, and not the least, the emphasis here is that the transformation of curriculum from Western culture to African context should be made more significant in African society, which should include their culture, interests, experience, and their objectives. It should therefore recognize and incorporate the indigenous knowledge, which should be like among other sides of knowledge. Like the way we respect Western knowledge, this is the way we should also respect African knowledge. There should be a shift from completely Western education curriculum to now African education curriculum, which is including their culture and experiences. Thanks for watching me. Until next time, it's bye.